that's the one I was thinking about. Oh, thanks. Hey, Brian, are you okay? Yeah. But that comes with experience. Shelley?
Thank you. Speak to you next week.
Great. Great. She went into the raffle and like that with Joe. Finish me.
Right, thanks everybody. We're not far off, we're just only a minute late, apologise for that. Before we start, I'm just going to hand over to Tracy for some housekeeping rules. Thank you.
Os bydd y larwm tân yn canu, gadewch yr ystafell drwy'r drws allanfa dan agosaf. Ni ddylid defnyddio'r liftiau. Dylai unrhyw unigolyn sydd â phroblem gyda'r grisiau ysbysu un o swyddogion y cyngor. Ond gynnull ar y lawnt o flaen derbynfa neuadd y dref. If a fire alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest available marked fire exit. Lifts must not be used. If you use the stairs will be a problem, please inform a council officer and congregate on the green outside the Guildhall reception. Sicrhewch bod ddyfeisiau symudol ar y bottom towel neu'n cael ei diffodd. Mobile devices should be turned to silent or off. Mae'r cyfarfod yn cael ei weithreddu yn fyw a bydd posib gwylio'r cyfarfod eto o'r archif. Os ydych yn eistedd yn oriel y cyhoedd gall y cymerau droi atoch chi hefyd a thybu'r eich bod yn caniatau cael eich ffilmio. This meeting will be broadcast via the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing from archives. If you're in the public gallery, the cameras may also capture your image and you are deemed to be consented to being filmed.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tracy. Right, welcome this afternoon. Homes and environment, it's been a few months due to the election, etc. So, we have a good meeting this afternoon. First item on the agenda, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies being received from Councillors Maddox, Parry Jones and Councillor Paul Rogers.
Thanks, Craig. Agenda item 2, confirmation of minutes. Page 3. So the meeting held on Wednesday, 16th of October last, 2019. So, just for accuracy, page 3. Page 4. You happy with them? You move them? Thanks, Sonia. Seconded by Brian. Show of hands, please. Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest, including written declarations. Members are reminded of the responsibility under paragraph 11 of the Members' Code of Conduct to declare the existence and nature of any personal interest in respect of any business to be transacted at this meeting. Any declarations of interest? John?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Item 5, member of the family works for the department, so I will be leaving the room, Chair.
Okay, recorded that. Thanks, John. Agenda item 4, work programme. I'll hand over to Craig for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just some updates for members of the committee to consider. 4.1 does list the changes that were made to your work programme in October. Obviously, due to the general election, there were significant changes required to the work programme. So 4.2 lays out the November meeting was cancelled due to the discussions following within the pre-election period, and the December meeting actually fell on the day of the general election, so there was no business transacted on that day. Due to these changes, the work programme of the committee has been amended. The report in respect to waste reduction and recycling initiatives is now before you today, instead of where it was originally to be considered in November 2019. To address the work programme of the committee for forthcoming months, it suggested that the items with regard to welfare reform and biodiversity now come to your next meeting in February. The other outstanding reports arising from postponements of the two meetings are in respect to the Affordable Housing Build and Buy programme and environmental enforcement. It suggested that the report in respect of the Affordable Build and Buy programme be added to the items to be scheduled, as there's not a considerable amount to add to information that was previously reported to members in an information report in August 2019. And it's also suggested that the environmental enforcement report be added to items to be scheduled, as there's not currently space on the work programme in the next few meetings. That's what I proposed, Chair. We'll take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions about the work programme? We're all happy with that, yeah? Okay, we'll move on. For that, yeah. So, can we have a proposal that we're all happy? And then, yeah, second, show of hands, formality done. Thank you. Okay, next agenda item 5. Purpose of this is to look at recycling figures and the recycling figures and carbon reduction. I've got two officers with us this afternoon. Chief Officer Darren Williams and the lead member. No, he's not an officer, he's a lead member, he's a councillor, David A. Bithell. And I've got the leader of the council who's politely requested if he could speak on this matter and just make a statement and then leave the room. So I've said that's okay, so I hope it's all right with the committee. So Mark, I'll hand over for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I do apologise. I'm just waiting for the mic to come on now. I don't know if everybody can hear me. Is everybody okay? Yeah. I can just leave a moment and we'll there you are.
Can you try another one?
Well, there you are. So, right, Chair, can I thank you first of all for allowing me to speak with regards to recycling in Wrexham. I think why I've come along this morning this afternoon just to clarify where we are as an administration with regards to 3-weekly bin collections. So,
As lead member of Organisation, Finance, Performance, Health and Safety and Governance, I have prepared a report on the Revenue Budget 2020-2021, which will go out later today and be considered at the Executive Board next week. In this report, I am recommending that the Council does not change its refuse collection and recycling arrangements and does not move to 3-weekly collections in the next budget year. I believe that other lead members will support this position next week, but clearly I would not want to preempt the Executive Board's consideration next week. And the reason why I come here today, Chair, there has been some things said, and I just wanted to come along to show leadership and clarify where we are as an administration moving forward on 3-weekly bin collections. Thank you for allowing me to speak, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. Okay. If you want to comment, Al, yeah?
Can I thank Mark very much for making that statement, because it did worry me greatly coming to the meeting today, the context in which we were going to be discussing this, and to hear quite clearly from Mark now that the proposal, I've been looking on the web because I know that the Executive Board papers are published sometime during today. They weren't by the time I left the house at 1:30 this afternoon, but they will be there sometime this afternoon. And it would be useful to know what was in that report, but you've given us a feeling for what's going to be there. So our conversation this afternoon isn't pushing this on the basis that it has to be done for financial reasons. It does leave us open now to be able to discuss the principles, and that would give us time maybe for more adequate discussion as to how do we make the changes? And if so, how do we do it? And over what timescale and so on. So that's a very useful comment that you made today, and I thank you for making it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, Mark. Thanks. David?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Following on from the leader's comments, obviously this report was due to be considered back in November at the request of the Homes and Environment Scrutiny Committee, but obviously it was delayed due to the election and obviously put back until January. So I think the leaders put some reassurance now about the position for the next financial year. However, what we do need to do, Chair, is to consider the long-term aspirations of reaching our statutory target of 70% by 2025. What I would like to say is I know Welsh Government are currently looking at their waste strategy, and in the next few weeks there will be a consultation on waste, and I attend the ministerial programme boards down in Cardiff, and I know Welsh Government are considering a consultation. That might increase the target for local authorities. We are not sure at this stage. So this report pulls together some of the work that we've been doing. It also pulls together some financial modelling that Darren and the officers have been doing to ensure that we reach our target of 70% by 2025. So obviously this council has supported the introduction of the blueprint. That was agreed some years ago. We have been working to the Executive Board blueprint, and also last year all members of the council unanimously did support we did support unanimously the declaration of a climate emergency, where we would support a reduction in carbon emissions and bring a further report back to council later this year. Obviously, since the early days, our recycling targets have gone from 3% to approximately 65-66%, which this authority's done really, really well. But to reach that next target, we do need to consider how we're going to achieve the recycling target in the next few years. So this is not just about an introduction of 3 weekly bin collections. That is mentioned in the report as an option, but there is other options as well that members may wish to consider in the future. But what I would say is what we're doing as a local authority is obviously the financial situation has got slightly better. That doesn't mean that we can take our foot off the pedal really as far as reaching our targets or reducing our carbon emissions. So the officers still have to do this work. The officers have prepared this report in consultation with Internal Audit and Paul Tham, who work with our PFI contractor and RAP Cymru to look at the potential fines that we could incur if we don't meet our statutory target of 70% by 2025. Obviously in the report as well, it's got population growth, that the council is looking at population. Obviously Wrexham is increasing as a local authority. Our waste arisings on 4.7, and obviously 4.9 touches on Welsh Government's recycling targets and associated fines. As the leader has said, subject to Executive Board approval next week, there isn't no budgetary implications subject to approval. I'm not preempting the decision. There isn't no budgetary implications to the next financial year, so it does give the council some time to look at potential options for consideration in the future on what we do with waste, because obviously we have for the last 2 years gone out to consultation with the public and asked the public what they think about 3 weekly collections, and we are soon to do a public consultation on carbon reduction in early March as well. That's all I'm going to say, Chair, at this moment in time, because that's the report. It's more of a policy decision rather than an operational decision, and I was just going to ask Darren now if he wanted to add anything further.
Thank you, Councillor Bithell. I think that was a relatively comprehensive summary of the position. The only thing I'd like to just point out to members, and I think both the leader and Councillor Bithell did mention it briefly, is that the Welsh Government are currently consulting on reviewing their waste strategy. It's a consultation that's got a slightly different slant to it these days. It's called a circular economy. We will, as a council, be responding to the consultation in due course. I think that closes in April. And as Councillor Bithell said, that may well change some of the outcome targets that are currently attached to recycling across Wales. It is a timely report in as much as it will tie in to the future Welsh Government's review of their waste strategy, but also it ties into some challenges that the Council have to face in the future years to do with delivery of a recycling service which will meet the recycling targets which are currently set, and also the challenges that we now face to deliver against our carbon pledge. The report is intended to inform future policy direction and is about forecasting and modelling of future scenarios. So whilst I'm more than happy to talk on individual ward-based matters, if I could ask, please Chair, if this could deal with the strategy about future policy matter. And I'm sure that many of you will have issues that you wish to talk about in terms of operational things with the waste service. My officers back in Abbey Road are more than happy to deal with that, and indeed if you don't get any joy with those, I'm more than happy to field and to try and assist with getting some responses back on that. But if I could try and draw your attention to a future policy direction for our waste strategy, particularly bearing in mind what this report is presenting to you, which presents the case both on a recycling performance, a financial, and of course a carbon footprint basis. Thank you, Chair. Nothing more to add.
Thanks, gentlemen. Right, what I intend doing, we'll go this one page by page. It's not a lot of pages, so we should be able to give it a thorough heading. So, if you go on page 17, which is the start, have we got anything on that one to start? 1 to 3.1. Any comments or questions on that? No? We'll go over to page 18. Mark?
4.1 talks about a strong programme of behavioural change. We don't get a sense of that in this report. I know that there's some education work going on, but I think if we're going to transform the way we recycle and improve the way we recycle, education is at the heart of that. So I like an idea of the strong programme of behavioural change campaigns that we're seeing. And in 4.2, we talk about carbon reduction, which of course is important. This makes up 8% of our total council carbon emissions, but we don't get to learn how much these changes would reduce the carbon emissions by, and whether we will see things like fly tipping increase, and that will increase the carbon emissions, and journeys by individual householders, they may also increase to Bryn Lane as a result of 3 weekly bin collections. Has that been factored in? So I just want to get a sense of, do we know the answers to these, or do we need to investigate further?
Can I touch on the first part, and I'll let Darren come in perhaps on the carbon reduction? What I would say is that obviously this report's not about 3 weekly bin collections. This is about policy direction. The second point, what I would say about behavioural change is that myself, Darren, and other cabinet members from North Wales have been meeting for the last 6 months to look at behavioural change programme, and the Minister, Hannah Blythen, is currently looking at doing a national, and when I mean national, I mean Wales behavioural change programme to look at how to educate the public better in how they recycle, educating schools, and obviously promoting reduction in carbon emissions. So the Welsh Government are currently going to embark on a national campaign which local authorities like Wrexham are supporting. But obviously, I'm sure every member in every ward in the county borough does have the issues of sometimes miscollections. I mean, to be fair to our crews, I'll give you one example. If people complain about a miscollection or the collections being contaminated, our crews are sticking in boxes to say that the boxes are contaminated for whatever reason. But then they ring up, the individual residents do ring up and say they won't take it or they've missed it, but that's due to contamination. So we do need to work better with our constituents and residents to educate people about what we're trying to do educationally to encourage people to recycle correctly. I'll let Darren pick up on the other part.
Yeah, I think going back to what I said, if those of you who do look at our blogs and our campaigns and our publicity campaigns, that have been quite a strong theme certainly over the last 6 months, but more than that, probably approaching 12, 18 months now, where there are probably at least 2 blogs that the council have been promoting on all their social media channels, Twitter and the likes. And those are all to do with trying to change people's attitude and behaviours about where they can put the waste, trying to offer useful hints and tips about how perhaps you can think differently about where you dispose and reuse in some ways some of the waste which perhaps households might produce. This isn't a particular report about operational matters, so it doesn't talk a lot about that. It's just to give you a flavour about the future policy direction. If I was bringing a report on behavioural changes, which I could, then we could talk about those campaigns and why we've targeted them in the way we have. The report is tended to just present the position with a factual basis for you to consider as a scrutiny committee to help us determine our future policy direction. That leaves me with our carbon emission work. Of course, there is a myriad of options about what will happen with our carbon footprint dependent on our future policy direction. There are masses of those. And we can examine those when we know where we are. At this stage, particularly in line with our pledge to council, which will require that we submit an action plan by the next annual council, which is I think in May. It's just to give members a flavour that we do have at the moment 8% of the council's carbon emissions are attributable to waste. It's just to give you a flavour about what that is. Of course, there will be positives and negatives depending on the policy direction we take forward, and after this committee can formulate some conclusions, then we can think about how those might impact on that. I think Councillor Bithell touched on many of the other items which I believe were questioned there, but we have, I'll just touch briefly on point 4.3 about our recycling performance, because if you look at our recycling performance, particularly in quarters 1 and 2, we report quarterly on our recycling performance, and you will see as we hit quarter 1 and 2 of financial years, the nature of this reporting, that we're probably well above the 70% mark for those initial parts of the first half of the year. It's the second half of the year which unfortunately drags the performance down. I think last year we were up over 70% on both quarter 1 and quarter 2. But overall, our recycling performance is lowered at more at the quarter 3 and quarter 4 intervals when we look to that. And that's due to a range of things. The nature of the waste is different, and of course there isn't as much garden waste during the winter months. There is just not enough garden waste to help bolster those recycling figures for that particular waste stream. So that is what this report is intended to do on that particular page, is to deal with some of our behavioural change programmes. We do there are literally hundreds of those campaigns which we can share with members. If you've not seen those, it's been happening for a long time. And the carbon footprint is just to merely make you aware that around 8% currently of our emissions are attributable to the waste service.
Thanks, Darren. Just remind members and officers that the carbon plans come into this committee in April, so we'll have a much deeper debate on it then as well, perhaps. But I've got some members already down, and I've got some non-members of the committee. I'm going to do the committee members first, and I'll fetch. Yeah, I've got you down, David. So it's Jeff. I've got Dana down. Michael, Alan, and Graham, and Brian. So I got Paul first.
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank the officer for the report in front of us today? There will be a point in the future, I'm sure you're aiming for a free weekly bin collection at some point, because these targets are such that, you know, we're going to be fined and we're going to have to recycle more. We're at a point now where the public I think are at their limit as far as recycling is concerned. We need to come up with some initiatives and some way of actually getting that over the hurdle a bit further. And I don't think this report, as good as it is, does that any justice, because it's only a small report. I think we need to look into this over a year, 2-year period, maybe set up a task and finish group, look at what other authorities are doing across the country, what other authorities are doing across Europe even, and how we actually get the public in a good way without the public going nuts and you know, getting them on board and getting them recycling that bit more, so that we can then move potentially without causing too much disruption to us as elected members to free weekly collections, because that's what I'm, because I don't want to be facing a free weekly collection situation again in another year's time, and we've done no work on how we're going to get these people, get our residents to recycle that bit that they're not recycling at the moment, and get them to change the behaviours that they can't change at the moment. It's a very difficult ask, that is, and I haven't got all the answers, and I'm sure the committee today hasn't got all the answers, but we need to find a way, and we need to set up a group of some sort that can look at this. I mean, that's where I'm coming from, Chair, because we can't go to a free weekly collection until we sort this issue out of how we're going to move to get more people to recycle and change their behaviour, because I've got residents in my ward that can barely cope at the moment with a fortnightly collection. We need to find a way of getting them to maybe set up a nappy round where we can get nappies collected, etc. We need to do some work on this. That's all I'm asking.
Thanks for that, Paul. Any comment on that?
Yeah, what I would say is I'm not disputing what Paul said. I think, to be fair, a lot of people, a lot of people in the county borough are a credit really to what they've done since the early part of recycling from 3% to 65, 66. Wales is the third best in Europe for recycling. I do agree to get to that from 66 to 70% by the year end is really, really difficult, and I think Darren touched on that. We're probably touching now quarter 1, quarter 2 of 70, 71%, but overall in the year we'll probably come back down to about 66%. We have introduced food waste. There's been a mixed reaction to food waste. We have rolled out compostable bags to help encourage people to do that, and that's seen a gradual increase over the last 12 months. Again, it does come down to education. Something I've been pushing for quite some time is about education in schools. We are looking at more education in our education centre down in FCC, and I know FCC arrange school visits very frequently, and I've done about 8 or 9 schools in the last few months. So education is really good. Children in schools are really, really good. But what I would say, Paul, I know you made a comment to say some people are not ready for 3 weekly collections. I think you're right. I think families in particular probably would find it difficult. But likewise, people who live, just a couple or 2 people who live in a household might find it relatively easier than people with 4 people that live in the house. So again, I think there's a mixed reception from the public. But again, obviously, you mentioned about task and finish and looking at other options. And I think there is different authorities that have done different things. quite a lot of authorities have done 3 weekly collections. Some authorities in North Wales have done 4 weekly collections. But what I can say here today, this report's not about doing one or the other. This is about where we are, that we need to do something as a policy direction as a council to meet our statutory targets of 70% by 2025. How we do that is really, really difficult. And sometimes, you know, education can't do it alone. So it is really, really tricky to get to that 70% continually.
Just a brief comeback. I quite agree with Lee. The public have done really well in recycling so far. At the point they are, they deserve all the credit in the world. But as you say, there's certain families that can't, if we were to go on to a free weekly collection, can't go on that free weekly collection. There'd be rubbish everywhere. There'd be increases in flight tipping. We need to set up a group of some sort that's going to really look into this over the next year, 2 years, where we can really push the glass ceiling on the recycling, do what other authorities can't do, maybe pioneer, but we can't just look at it, come back. I don't want to see a report coming back in 2 years' time. We've not got the recycling rate up for free weekly collections in another 2 years. I don't want that. I want to see us trialling out in different areas, maybe, whatever, but we need a group to look at it, maybe from this committee and officers as well, to look at what we can do to push that recycling rate, the hardest bit up higher. Thank you.
Thank you. Sonia?
Staying around the same area, thank you very much for the information to date, and I accept we're talking at a higher level, but I think when we see the pictures of the stuff that is going through to the recycling plant, there is a lot of confusion in people's minds as to what can and cannot be recycled. So there is the big educational side there. People have demonstrated their willingness to recycle. I accept the challenges for the larger families. That's an operational side that we have to look at. But we also have to think, how are we educating not just the children, but landlords? We've got a whole private rented sector that is generating a lot of waste. And people can be very casual, especially if they're moving around a lot. And it's getting the responsibility lying with the individual as well as us as the corporate body. What are we doing going forward on that?
Darren?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and also Councillor Blackwell's earlier, which I think is of a similar theme. And whilst I entirely agree with the sentiments from both of you, really, I think it is important to just reflect and to look. And I'm hesitating, Chair, because I'm jumping forward just only a little bit. But if you look at the recycling performance graph on page 19, right at the top of the page, so I'm only just intruding onto the next page in terms of your page by page, Chair. But I think what we forget sometimes sitting around this table, and I know I certainly wasn't here when we started work on this in 2002, and I know that some of you weren't members in 2002, but just reflect on where we were and what we've done. This isn't a new phenomenon. This is not something that we've been just suddenly decided we need to do. We've plucked all the low-hanging fruit with this exercise to date. We started in 2002 at around 3% of recycling, and we've moved up to 70%. It is that is in no small thanks to the residents of the county borough and to members and to officers that have been trying to develop policy directions that got us to that point. And if you read some of the press, and if you look at the Welsh Government's consultations and look at what's happening across the UK in most cases, but certainly across Wales, the low-hanging fruit has been plucked. And whilst I do understand that we need to try and strive to find some miraculous solution to get us over the last hurdle, unfortunately, as with most things, it comes down to a point where we have to consider in that a little bit of enforcement work and a little bit of more. We've done the carrot work, maybe we need to start getting the stick. And it is about reducing capacity, whilst we still provide capacity in the black bins for people to do exactly as Councillor Benbow-Jones said, to put waste in their black bins, which is recyclable, then we are failing. Now, we are either failing because we're giving them the ability to do that, and they can't
change or we're not educating them. We're trying to tackle the education policy, and we could try and do a little bit more on that, and I've tried to give a flavour about some of the stuff we're doing. But ultimately, whilst there's still room in black bins, then what is happening is some people are just continuing to throw recyclable goods into the black bins. So whilst I do agree, we have an opportunity to maybe look at that if this committee decides that's the recommendations it needs to formulate from the report. I just want to draw your attention that there is no magic solution to this. It is not an untried and tested piece of work. It's been worked on by a lot of people across the UK for the last 20 years. And we've been doing exactly that in Wrexham, and year on year you will see a steady improvement where we've done all the low-hanging stuff. We now got to the point where we're at the verge of maximising out with that. We've tried the difficult things, as Councillor Bithell said, trying to encourage residents to put out food waste separately so that we can capture that. We've given them compostable bags to help with that, because it's not a very pleasant task. But still, with all that change, we are unlikely, based upon our steady state progress, to meet the targets in accordance with the forecast which sit before you. So that is the challenge, and whilst it might be a recommendation that this committee chooses to make in terms of our policy direction, that we establish a working group to do it again, I don't want anybody here to leave and think, oh yeah, there's a solution here, Darren's just missed it, or officers have missed it, or we haven't. It is a lot of work's gone into this across the UK, and you just need to be mindful of that. And you will see that even in some of the modelling work that's in the report, I'm not skipping any further forward, that the modelling work that we've done, we still anticipate there will be a year-on-year improvement. It just won't be fast enough. So that is the challenge with that. Of course, the other challenge is that whilst we're doing this, the funding source that enables us to do a lot of work, recycling work in Wales, is forecast to has been reducing, and we anticipate will likely to be reduced further. So the money and the ability to think inventively and to do other things is also a challenge. I know it's maybe not, but I think to answer both of your questions, it just gives you a flavour about some of the stuff we've been doing. I didn't want you to think that there's something we're missing, because unless there's something that everyone's missing, we've done what we can.
Thanks, Darren. Sonia?
I think there is still a perception in a sector of the population that the bins go straight to the landfill site. I don't think they fully understand the full journey from curbside to its disposal. And I'm sure it has been explored, but sometimes you do have to reinforce. That's the only observation. Thank you.
And I think that members were treated to the tour the latter end of last year, and everybody that went along were surprised about the amount of work that does go on in the facility. And perhaps it wouldn't have been a bad idea on that particular visit if the press and that had come along, and they could have perhaps explained and give a full picture of exactly what goes on in there. David?
Can I just pick up on Sonia's point about landfill? Wrexham Council does not send any waste to landfill. All our waste goes to FCC environment, and the reality is there's only a very, very small percentage of the stuff that cannot be recycled that FCC dispose of, but it doesn't go to landfill sites. We haven't, since I think the last landfill site we had was in Newbridge, was it? Penabont. But obviously Penabon's closed, but we don't send anything to any landfill site in the county borough.
But it's public perception.
While we're on page 19, a couple of things that I'd just like to fetch up, if it's all possible. I'm looking at the scenarios where we're looking at the remodelling and trying to work forward to reduce carbon and the waste and that sort of stuff. If you've got a scenario where in my house, perhaps I've got me and my wife, we can manage 3 weeks, but across the road there's a family with 3 or 4 kids who would actually they would be struggling, from day one. Would there not be perhaps an idea to look at further down the line where the likes of myself could be considered for 3 weeks and families and that for 2 weeks, That's just one. And another thing as well, we're looking at your supermarkets, and you look at your places where you can put your clothes, your shoes and all that sort of stuff. If, for example, the recycling lorries were free on a Saturday, and I'm not asking for it to be done on a big scale, but perhaps one Saturday in Sainsbury's, the first Saturday of the month, second Saturday of the month in Asda, third Saturday of the month in Aldi or Lidl, what have you, and work it that way, where you'd have a lorry and just one member of staff, so the cost wouldn't be phenomenal. I think that might generate a fair amount of recycling to come in and save it going in the bins and going to landfill. So I think that's, you know, that's something. Just two thoughts for your comments, please. Thanks.
Yeah, first point, I think, were we to make any policy change and a shift in strategy to deal with our waste service, then obviously there would be criteria where, you know, you might have large families above a certain size get a slightly larger bin. That wouldn't be an unusual thing to do. There are also special, and I call them special because they're just out of the ordinary services which we currently run now. So some people who have medical conditions and need special, you know, if they have with them, some of their medical dressings and the like, which are just needs to be collected and disposed of, those sort of services for absorbent products can be introduced. And if you look at some of the authorities in Wales, particularly those that have shifted to a reduced collection frequency, then many of them do run dedicated absorbent hygiene product collection facilities, and they will go round and they will collect those items separately, and that's just one consideration that could come alongside a future policy direction that we might choose to make as a council. Of course, that isn't particularly going to impact significantly on your recycling, because those materials are already being delivered, and the ones which are recyclable are already, you would suggest, are already being recycled. The challenge with that is, of course, the affordability of putting on extra rounds to deal with those services, and also about how you process that waste. If it's coming in such quantities and not mixed with general waste, it might need a dedicated processing facility. But I know there is a lot of work going on across Wales for a Wales-wide process to deal with those type of products, if that waste stream was something that we chose to do in Wrexham. So those are options that you can consider. But I think, to come back to your question, Chair, yeah, of course there would be caveats and policy decisions made about bigger bins for larger families and the like. That would be a matter, of course, I would expect.
Thanks for that, David. Right, next one, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points, really, and it is related to the page we're on to some extent, but if I could just go back to Mark's opening comment. I mean, quite clearly the report, as has been said, is not about 3 weekly bin collections, it's about increasing our recycling rate. As part of that, I think some of the rationale of moving to a 3 weekly collection is that the black bin would get full, to put it bluntly, and therefore they would recycle it more and not do that. But Mark's comments at the start of the meeting were related to a report going to the Executive Board on the revenue budget. So quite clearly there's a revenue implication for doing it or not doing it, if you like. And I think, you know, it's welcome that we've perhaps got a stay of execution this year in terms of our financial settlement, that we don't have to perhaps go along the 3 weekly route now, and it gives us perhaps a year to get our recycling situation a bit clearer, sorted out. But at the end of the day, we're only putting off an unpalatable decision. And if you ask the general public whether they would rather not reach the recycling targets and stay with the fortnightly collection, or have £500,000 to spend on potholes or whatever, you get a completely different divergence of views on it. So I think that's just a comment on that initial opening statement we had. It is difficult, and I mean, there are no easy fixes. Darren's gone through it and he's been in the system a long while to know that, very experienced. But I think in terms of this report, there's some of the base data that I would have liked to have seen, and that is, you know, the magnitude of the problem, if you like, in terms of a 3 weekly collection. We hear that the crews have got the technology now to know whether a bin has not been put out on time or whether it's been a miscollection. And if somebody rings up and says their bin hasn't been emptied, they will know whether it's been put out or not. So that same technology should be able to be used to see how many people don't actually put their black bin out every fortnight. Speaking personally, and I know a lot of my neighbours who are either single or on their own, you know, with sort of no family, children and so on, I don't put my black bin out probably up to 6 weeks. You know, it takes me 6 weeks to fill it. Do my recycling, and same as everybody else does. So is there sort of 20% of the collection that's already not putting their black bin out every fortnight? They're leaving it for a month, or they're leaving it for 6 weeks. So that would give us a flavour, if you like. If we had that sort of figure, or a perception of how that works out, it would give us an idea, well, okay, if we did introduce it, 20% of the population are already doing it anyway through their own, through their own devices. So that's one piece of base data that I would have particularly liked. The other one is the issue in terms of, and I think we've raised it here before, is whether the Bring sites at Bryn Lane and Plasmatic and Brumbo are actually included in the recycling targets, because we all know, and I mean, I live near the Bryn Lane facility, if those arisings there that are taken in by members of the public are counted into the municipal waste, and therefore part of the recycling of the municipal waste, quite a high element that goes particularly to Bryn Lane, I can't comment on the other two because I don't use them, but is commercial waste. It's people going in with, you know, one-man bands with gardening companies, taking their trailers, taking their stuff in, council people from our estate offices and so on, taking stuff down there, builders taking their rubble down there. So it would be useful to have a handle on whether they are included and how much of that is actually recycled, and whether we should be including that in the calculation for a municipal or domestic waste. The third one is a bit sort of different really in terms of the processes. I mean, we hear now that the black bins are collected, they're taken to Bryn Lane, they're sorted, the materials that are recycled are taken out of that, and what's left goes to FCC to do whatever with. Now, if it's already been taken out and recycled, is there really, I mean, okay, we're doing it for them, if you like, we're doing it for the people that aren't doing it for themselves, we're doing it, but if it's already been recycled, is it going to make a big difference, you know, if we stay with the fortnight sort of, and people put some of their recyclates in the black bin, if we're sorting it out when it gets to Bryn Lane, and it's counted in our recycling targets, well, is that going to make a difference or not? So that's the sort of base data, if you like, that I would like to be able to progress a bit further. And I don't know what I'd do with it once I've got it, because you've still got to come up with a solution. But it's that issue that I think perhaps we need a bit more info on, really.
Thanks for that, Michael. Any comment for that?
Yeah, I've got the three, I think. So the first one was about how many black bins are not generally put out on the regular frequency. We do have technology in the vehicles, and indeed, I think it might be next week, but we're doing a blog and some work with our behaviour change programme to talk about how they work. So you'll see on our systems, you will see a picture in cab and show you exactly what they do. Those systems work by exception. So what I mean is that you can input the capacity of that system, bearing in mind that on any single week, we've got around about 62,000 properties. So on any single week, they're all visited twice. So that's 120 odd thousand collections we do on any single week. And whilst it would be great, wouldn't it, to just record, yes, Mr. Jones put his bin out and puts it out regularly every Thursday that we collect it. What happens with that system, that information would go explode, you know, we'd literally do millions of collections a year. So what the system does is, it registers when there is either an anomaly or a problem. So if there is no bins presented, then we will make a note of that, and if there is no or if a recycling box has been left because it's contaminated, that we will make a note of that. We have some information, and no doubt we could get better information as the system develops, and sometimes it's really difficult because we have some residents. It's not unusual for some people to try and beat the system and put their bins on the other side of the road to try and think, you know, and we have had examples where residents got 2 bins and they put one outside Mr Jones's because he doesn't put his bin out, and they put their own outside theirs. So there's all sorts of things that we try and do to try and track that information, but we've got some. It's a massive amount of information with refuse and recycling collections, I'm sure you're aware. This was just sort of drilled down to some basic options about our policy direction. We could look for other information if we thought that would be useful, and we can work on that. HWRCs, if you are a trader, and then I'm sure you will be aware that over the last 3 or 4 months, FCC, along with officers here, have done a concerted effort to eradicate this, or to better manage traders who come onto our sites. And indeed, we had an irate member of the public down just before Christmas who suggested he was just, but you know, there was obviously trade waste which he was disposing of, and he'd asked to leave the site. There's been a more concerted effort to try and control that. Yes, we are aware that probably there are still some that do tip there. In terms of other services like housing and housing estates, then that is separate waste. It is weighed over the weighbridge and weighed out. So that's separate, and that's paid for separately, and it doesn't come into the municipal waste, but it is treated in the facility. Our general household waste that goes into the HWRCs are included in the figures that you see before you. And they're all, it is strictly governed on the way that we have to record our waste, which is on the Waste Wales data flow system. And if you have a look on that, you can see where all our waste goes, and it shows a trail about, for all of the waste streams, what happens to it. I think the last question you asked was about the system, and about, you know, we have a chemical treatment process down, as you're aware, down on Bryn Lane, and that does treat now and does try to extract from the masses of black bin waste that comes to the plant on a daily basis recyclable material to try and extract them. The problem with that is, of course, that if you're talking about cardboard and paper, as soon as it's put in the black bin and then some wet material is put against it, it's really difficult, so it deteriorates and you can't grab it out. But the system does take what it can out, but that we know that there is still a significant amount of recyclable material that is in the waste. And food waste particularly forms a massive part of our waste composition, which is going through, and we're having to treat. You cannot extract food waste from a massive black bin of waste, as I'm sure you appreciate. For, you know, it's just not practical in the systems we have. But it does extract plastics and, you know, what it can, metals and those sorts of materials it pulls out. They're not always in the best quality, and so therefore we have a different problem, but the problem all the same, in as much as trying to find a market to actually take that material is a challenge. We want people to put the recycling out in a dry, good quality recyclable material, because then there is more chance that we can find a market, even if sometimes in a lot of cases we have to pay for that, but a market where we can actually dispose of the waste so it doesn't actually get put back into the residual that's left. So yes, the system does try and extract recyclables out of the bin, but some of it, once it's in there, it's gone. And so we have to capture that. We need to extract that before it goes in the black bin. And you're right, your initial comment was, yeah, is about reducing the capacity in the black bin to force people to think about recycling more. That is the challenge that we have. 3 weekly is just an option, you can do that. There are a myriad of others, and as a committee I'm presenting you with the facts and passing the ball for you to think about what you might consider might be an appropriate policy for us to adopt.
You okay with that, Mike? Okay, Alan?
Thank you very much. I'm glad that the conversation this afternoon now is on the basis of the policy, the strategic view, and that we're not just looking at this from the necessity of a financial situation. I think we're all saying very much the same thing. I think we're going to be in agreement when we come to the end of this meeting. We have to make changes. We have to make changes before 2025. So there's an urgency about what we're doing. I'm very much in agreement with what's been said already, that a working group to discuss all of this would be very useful. Certainly we've got to be putting the thought in before we introduce anything. I remember the days now, didn't realise it went back to 2002, when our recycling rate was 3%. And it took a concerted effort at that time, a huge campaign to explain things to the public, to win the hearts and minds of the public so that they would accept recycling. And over the years since then, we've gone up from 3%, as you say now, to the mid-60s. And it's sort of hovering now, going up and down year by year, around about that 65%. That step change now that's needed to tip us over the top of 70% is a major one. And it's not one that we can do by tweaking. It's one that's got to be done by careful thought. And I think we're at a point now, it's almost a tipping point, isn't it? That in order to achieve this, we've got to have a new change of approach, where we go back to the public. Does it mean bringing Michael back again? Many people remember the days of Recycle with Michael very fondly, and it was a very successful campaign. It went down very well with school children and so on, and school children were able to influence their parents and so on. So it was a very good strategic tool at that time. Maybe we need, maybe not Michael, but maybe we need something similar now to win people over. We've got to make the changes. They're not going to be palatable. Once you mention extending the collection period, people are up in arms and no, it's a council again, and we get all of the blame. I look around my ward and I speak to people there. Many households now will say, oh yes, I could cope with a 3-weekly, even a 4-weekly collection. I could cope with a smaller bin. But they're a minority. You've then got the families, and they can't cope at the moment with a large bin on a fortnightly basis. I then look around a ward such as mine, which is a lot of rented sector, and the bins are there, out on bin collection day, lids up, and you look inside, and the majority of what's in there is recyclable. So we've not got the message across, have we? There are so many people now that are not understanding that they can save money for the council, for themselves, if they recycle more. It's not a hassle to do that. We've tried with, what were they called, the wheelie bins in my ward because of the terrace nature. They didn't work. But there are other areas now that know what they call the trolley bins, sorry. And that system didn't work in my ward. But there are other areas now which are crying out for them and would welcome that. It's a case of one size doesn't fit all, does it? We've got to, it's horses for courses, it's what suits a different area and even different streets within different areas as to how we achieve it. And, you know, whether, I wouldn't like to see, as you're suggesting now, that we collected some people's bins every 4 weeks, but because you're a family, you collect them every fortnight. But I can see the situation where you had different sizes bins for different people. And what's absolutely imperative now is, one of the things that families will say, if they're putting nappies into a bin, then at the end of a fortnight, they're smelly enough. 3 weeks, 4 weeks, can't cope. Therefore, it would be absolutely essential now that we had some sort of separate collection system for that. There are people with medical reasons, incontinence, and so on. There are all of those materials. This is not the same as clinical waste, because we've got collections of clinical waste, haven't we? If you've got hospital-type things, then those are dealt with very differently. But these are things which come into our general waste collection and disposal system at the moment. And it's just a matter of making alternative arrangements for that. My big issue now is that we're at the point where we need step change again. And we're not going to be able to do that by imposing things quickly. An announcement that we're going to go from 2 weeks to 3 weeks will go down like a lead balloon, won't it? But if in the course of a year we were able to say to people, look, absolute necessity now, we're at this 65%, we need to go up to 70 and possibly even to 75% soon after 2025. And we can only do that with your cooperation. And as a result of that, it's going to be less costly for you. There are savings, as Mike says, that can be put into other services which are crying out for finance. But it means that we've got to work very closely with the public to win hearts and minds over again. So it's a new Recycle with Michael type of campaign starting now to get us over that hurdle to the big percentages. I'm all in favour now of, we can't reach a decision today, but I think the best way forward is to set up a working group that would be able to go through all of these. Maybe we need at the end of the day to have some sort of a trial area. Maybe we have a number of trial areas where we try one thing in one area, try something else in another area. But change has got to come, and we've got to win people's minds over on this, persuade them that it has to be done, persuade them that it is workable. There are many authorities now that have gone over to 4 weekly. everybody up in arms, they thought, but it's been there in operation, and many of the problems that they foresaw haven't actually arisen, have they? So it's a matter of education, getting that information across. And I think to some extent, you won't get the message across simply by preaching to people. There's only one way of hitting them, and that is in the pocket. And I think enforcement is going to be needed. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with landlords, because where they've got rented, those very often are the ones that are doing no recycling at all. And you know, we're coming down to, should those be charged separately? Should there be a business charge for collecting that sort of waste, especially when it's not being recycled? So I think there are lots of things that we can consider that need to be discussed. The sooner we start, the better. But when we introduce a change, it's got to be with the support of the public, with the understanding of the public, and that's going to take time.
Thanks, Alan. Any comment on that?
I'm not sure that I missed anything, Chair. I'm happy if there was a question, but I think it was more
Right, Graham Rogers.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Here we are again, talking about 3 weekly bin collections, and I was quite alarmed, to be quite frank with you, when I read the report and reference was made to the 3 weekly bin collections. However, it's pleasing to note that for the forthcoming fiscal year, that will not occur. But I'm a realist, and I know it won't go away. So if it's not happening this year, guaranteed it'll be on the agenda for next year. So I'd like to make my position quite clear as far as 3 weekly bin collections is concerned, right? People are aware, fellow councillors are aware of my position. I will not support 3 weekly collections. It's as simple as. And the reasons for it, I firmly believe that the current system, as regards fortnightly bin collections, already poses issues in all wards on household waste being left by litter bins. Disposal of litter within the wards will add to additional problems for residents and the communities alike. The next point, contained within the report, makes reference to in excess of 1,200 missed collections. So I would be interested to know some of the reasons why these collections are not being targeted and collected on a regular basis. And finally, Councillor Bithell made reference earlier on as regards notices being left on bins in relation to the reasons for non-collection. I can assure Councillor Bithell, and I can only speak for my patch, Hermitage, on a regular basis, bins are left on the footpaths. And I'm yet to see any notice on any bin, the reasons for it. Yes, there are boxes as regards contamination. I've even seen a childish position whereby the bin in question that's aligned to what should be in the bin, you can't fault it. But there may be a piece of cardboard, there may be a newspaper, there may be a bit of silver on the top. So consequently, it's left and it's not collected. So as an individual, I have to make other means with other people of getting rid of that waste. So I'm not a happy bunny, as possibly Darren Williams and Councillor Bithell will, having heard what I've said, but you can be rest assured, I would like some answers in relation to the questions I posed, but I'll make it quite clear, Chair, right, to this committee and future committees, so long as I'm a county councillor, there will be no support from myself to move in from fortnightly to 3 weekly to monthly to 6 weekly. I firmly believe we are where we are and we should retain what we've currently got, and for the department in question to go out and communicate with the public of Wrexham, right, even down to schools, the importance of putting things in the right place. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Graham. Any comments of the member, the officer?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rogers. I think you made your position quite clear several times. Listen, I think the reality is, I think the sentiments that you state, many members feel the same way. And I think quite a lot of members have reservations about change in the way we do frequency of collections, and it's not an easy thing for an elected member to make a decision on. However, we do need to consider the future costs to the council. We do need to consider that unanimously we declared a climate emergency, and we need to work towards reducing our carbon emissions and carbon reductions. And that's why the report is here, and that's why the report was requested by the Homes and Environment Scrutiny Committee back in November 2019. So no decision that councils do now is easy, and everybody's got their own personal view about bin collections. And as Darren said, we collect from 60,000 properties every week, which is millions of properties every year. What I would say about contamination, it was quite interesting to read, to your comments about contamination, because it's something that I've been challenging officers to do, is about contamination. We do have the crews, to be fair to them. Darren, I know for a fact, challenges the crews about contamination. We want good recyclate back at the curbside, whether it's in cardboard, cans, plastics or whatever. The better quality recyclate we get back, the better FCC can market that and obviously dispose of it, reducing the costs to the local authority. And just for information, you might not have had any in your ward, and I'm not sure where they are, but in the last 12 months, our in-cab technology, which is on every vehicle, has recorded 6,500 contaminated either boxes or bins in the last 12 months. And to be fair, that's not me recording it, that's the crews on the ground pressing the in-cab technology to say this bin was contaminated by whatever, this box was contaminated or whatever. So 6,500 in the last 12 months have been contaminated due to whatever issue the crews felt it was necessary. On top of that, we are the media team, and I know this is, Darren touched on it earlier on. This week, one of the officers from the media team is going down to Abbey Road to have a look at our in-cab technology, because, as you're aware, the bins should be presented by 7:30. Some people put them out the night before, some people put them out in the morning, and some people put them out after the bin lorry has been and say that they've been missed. So that's a fact as well. But what I would say is, we do have cameras on all our vehicles, and a recent issue that was sent to me from somebody in the county borough said that our crews had missed the bins. We did challenge the crews. I won't say which location it was at, but the crew said, no, we didn't miss the bin. The bin was not presented. However, the cameras on the vehicle quite clearly show that the bin was out. So, we have work to do, both with the crews, and Darren knows the work he has to do, but I can assure you we've got in-cab technology which records, it goes directly to the contact centre, and the crews directly do that, and also the cameras on the vehicles do see all sorts of things going on, and I know for a fact in this case the bin was out, despite what the crew said, and sometimes it's the other way around as well. So, I mean, to be fair to our officers and to be fair to our crews, they have to deal with all sorts of stuff, and 60,000 collections every week, and generally they do a really, really good job. That's not to say that they can't do better, but the reality is they're collecting 60,000 properties every week.
Right, and that's that. Darren, any comment of yourself? Are you all right?
No, I don't think so, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, Brian, and then I'm going to fetch non-committee members then.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try not to repeat what's been said already. I support a lot of the comments made. I'm very pleased. Well, first of all, thank you for
for yourself as chair and officer to let me to go on to page 19, because you give me the lead on that. But very pleased with the statement from the leader. I'm pleased with the extra settlement that has helped that situation. Very impressed with the 0.07% miscollection, but obviously the percentage figure would be much higher in places like cul-de-sacs that are not accessible, etc. So those people, residents living in those areas, that figure wouldn't be 0.07. And we've got to work on that as well. But I'd like to see amongst the education the fact that I believe the less time on the streets, the less waste there's left after the collection. I know of instances where the bins are out well before they should be. And I also think that there's a community spirit should help on this. If there are people who are in difficulties in presenting their bin at 7 o'clock in the morning, then we try and educate people that neighbours will help in that situation. And we've had some high winds, and you can see what happens when you have high winds. And it's not the collector's fault that there's waste on the street. I would support looking at trends of collections and those who don't put their bins out on a regular basis, but that may, if we haven't got the technology, give us complications in to those doing the collections. Because I quoted in our pre-meeting that when I'm doing leafleting on occasions, it's best to go to every house rather than pick out the numbers that you've been given. So, encouraged by the statements today, thank the officers for their diligence in making progress. But obviously, I think it's down to education and working together to get to a situation where we possibly may reach the 70%. So, thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Any comments? Are we okay with that? Right, I'm going to fetch non-committee members in now. I got 3 that's put this out down to speak. Councillor Bithell.
Thank you, Chair. I initially came here today to speak against the 3-week...
Your mic's not on,
Good afternoon, Chair. Can you hear me now? Yeah. I initially came here today to speak against the proposed 2-weekly household waste collection. There was nothing mentioned in the... There was nothing mentioned...
Jeff, yours is on as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Come on.
Right.
Turn that off. I am.
Right, can you hear me, Chair?
I can hear you now.
Right, I initially came here today to speak against the proposed 3-weekly household waste collection. There was nothing in this report about the cost implications regarding covering of fly tipping if a 3-weekly cycle was introduced. I'm very pleased to hear from the leader of the council that they're going to take it to the executive board next week, and I hope all members will support the 2-weekly cycle. With regard to 4.3 recycling, I'd like to ask the officers a couple of questions. At the present time, plastic waste is collected each week, but not all plastic is allowed to go in the plastic bin due to the grades of it. I'm aware of that. And therefore, a lot of plastic is going into the black household waste bins, such as plastic coat hangers, plastic garden pots, tub lids, etc. What are we doing as a council? I know you're having a grin there, Darren. What are we doing as a council to retrieve all plastic for the future? Because at the end of the day, we're not recycling it correctly. And you mentioned about better cycling for cardboard. I mentioned to the officers in the past about proper stacker bins for the cardboard, tin and glass, because you get a windy and wet day, everything's blown across the road, and then we're asking the council officers to litter pick if you can get a street scene officer in your ward, and that could take weeks. And that's a cost implication on its own. So there's a couple of questions there for the officer.
Thanks, David. Aaron or David?
Yeah, I'll deal with that. The curbside collection service does provide for some waste streams, but not all. And of course, we have to measure the relative need for each waste stream. We do plastic bottles, pots, tubs and trays, which collects in your recycling receptacle. And that is collected by our crews on a weekly basis. There are some items of plastic which they don't collect, and that's because there isn't sufficient quantities of that waste. They are all collected from the household waste recycling centres, and the hard plastics, so your garden pot plant containers, your coat hangers, they are accepted there. They are not accepted on the recycling collection service, curbside collection service, and that just comes down to the pure capacity of the vehicles. We don't have the capacity for that type of waste. Of course, what you need to bear in mind is every time there is contamination in the waste, then that has the potential to jeopardise the disposal or the treatment of that waste. So we can't accept foreign items coming into waste streams, or it does jeopardise where that waste can actually be processed. And if that is the case, then in some cases, at the extreme, there is no option other than to treat it as municipal waste and push it through that way. So we lose a whole load of recyclable material. So we have to pay particular attention to recyclable material and appropriate recyclable material in the waste streams that we needed to come in. So hard plastics we don't accept because there isn't a quantity for that. And if you like, I can give you some information privately after the meeting in terms of how much hard plastics Wrexham Council actually process on a yearly basis, and you will be shocked because they're very low. Recyclable plastics, pots, tubs and trays and bottles, there is masses of that out there, and you will know because of the campaigns that go on in the BBC and the like about reducing that single-use plastic material. That is not hard plastic, which I believe you're referring to. But there is a facility for that, it's just not the curbside. The other element about stacking boxes, yeah, I would love to give everyone a stacking box. That is just not the funds. And as I said earlier, the grants which help support our recycling initiatives has reduced year upon year for the last 4 or 5 years, and there's a further reduction in this coming year. So we don't have that capacity. You don't have that capacity as members to allow me to provide you with those sorts of stacker boxes for all the residents in the county borough. I apologise for that, but that is the position you are in as members. You do not have that money. If you want that sort of money, you need another £1 million. That is the sort of figure you need to find if you want those type of containers to go to every property. And it's a significant amount of investment that would be required, and we don't have that. We took advantage of some opportunities when grants were available. They have dried up. I can't say any more than that, really. I think you are aware, Councillor, because I know you ask frequently about recyclable stacker trolleys, but that is facts. We don't have the money, and you as members do not have that unless you tell me you need to make savings to generate £1 million, in which case I could look at it. But at the moment, you do not have that money in this budget to allow that to be provided for all residents. So we've done the best we can with what limited resource we had from the grants. So yeah, I think I've answered your questions. I mean, if future opportunities do come where we have grants for those sorts of new recyclable trolleys or new initiatives, then of course we will try and do work to provide for those. But at the moment, I'm not seeing any coming in the current future.
Okay, David. I'd like to invite Councillor Dan Davis to come to the table, please.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just get my notes now. Yeah, because of the direction of the report has changed, it would have been useful really to have some sort of addendum, because now we're going through policy and how we can influence policy, and Darren alluded to the myriad of options that are available apart from the 3-week bin collection. So it would have been useful to have some sort of addendum just to give us an idea of those myriad of options, because the report is very much 3 weekly bin collections or do nothing. I think one of the key things is, and you know, with what we've been doing as a local authority and the decisions that have gone through full council, recycling, carbon reduction and budget is all interlinked. What we get in reports like this is very much the budget for the whole environment department. It would be useful if we could see the cash limited budget just for waste collection and what that net budget is, because we're aware that there's going to be a reduction in grant income from Welsh Government, because obviously our levels of recycling are quite high. You know, we have been for some time been leading the way on recycling, and you are going to get to a position where you're flatline. So it's really interesting, this conversation about how we can influence policy going forward and about changing behaviours. So one of the key ways of changing behaviours within our residents, you know, for our residents, is to energise and motivate them. And what Flintshire are doing, and it's recently announced now, where the recycling of plastic into road resurfacing and that type of pilot, why aren't we looking at big things like that? Why aren't we looking? Because that's one way of energising our residents, isn't it? That your plastic is going back into the roads and filling, you know, the roads that you're actually complaining about as a huge issue in Wrexham. That would really energise and motivate. And obviously with that comes the education and hopefully the policy. So I'm wondering if members would be minded to include that in their recommendations as feeding into the policy. I'd like to ask as well, because Darren also said about the residual waste that can't be collected, and that we're having to look at alternatives because we can't feed that through the PFI. So it's just an ethical practice question, really. The markets that we look to dispose of that waste, and obviously the contract that we've got with the PFI as well, I just want assurance that we're not shipping that abroad and we're not adding to the problem in Asia and then it being shipped back, because I think as a council we really need to be looking at our procurement and everything else that it is ethical. I've already said about the cash limited budget for the cost of service. And also as well, do we lease our fleet? Because if we lease our fleet, are we not looking at a time frame for replacing that with electric vehicles? Because that would be part of this whole discussion on reducing the carbon footprint. But I think going forward, if we do at last minute change the direction of the report, it would be really, really useful to focus that debate then through an addendum. And I would ask the chair and you know, chairs and vice chairs to take that up going forward, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Anna. And it's interesting what you said about the plastic going for the roads. I read it on Rob's site this morning. But the actual facility that's manufacturing it is in Wrexham and the trial in Flintshire. So
it's inside, Chair. It's up the road, isn't it? It's in our county borough. Makes sense to use that.
Thank you. David?
Well, thank you, Chair. I'll answer the first aspect. We haven't changed direction of the report. The report's been sitting on Craig's desk, I think, or somewhere, due to the election. Obviously, it was scheduled to come in December, and then it was delayed till January. So we haven't changed the direction of the report. The report slightly changed in budgetary terms, but the reality is the report is there. The council are following the blueprint, and obviously prior to introduction of any changes in recycling, the Scrutiny Committee did ask for this report to come back to the Scrutiny Committee, and that's exactly what we've done. What I would say in respect of the comment about plastics and plastics going into the highway network, and I have seen the article that Flintshire are doing or putting an amount of plastics into their highway infrastructure. I'm not sure exactly how much plastics are actually going into the road, But what I would say is that we are looking at new technology and innovative ways to reduce costs, and we have looked at the potential use of plastics going into roads. In fact, I've raised the issue with Welsh Government. Welsh Government are looking at potentially using plastics into highway infrastructure. But what I would say is that I know Paul Fairclough, our contracts manager, is currently liaising with APSI about best practice in England and Wales to see who does it and what quantity of plastics goes into that. So I can assure you that we are looking at that. And like I said, I'm not sure how much plastic Flintshire are putting into their highway infrastructure. Credit to Flintshire for trying it out, but how successful that is or is not is a matter to be determined for the future. So that answers the first part of the question, but I know Darren will come back on electric vehicles, fleet and leasing, etc.
Sorry, in terms of the options, I think the options have been presented about policy direction because you will have supported and you will be aware that we work to the Welsh Government Blueprint. And the Welsh Government Blueprint essentially is quite an in-depth document, but if you do read that, it talks about reducing capacity for black bin waste at the house, for households. Essentially, that you can do that in two ways. You either collect, you keep the same size box as they've currently got and collect it less frequently, or give them a smaller box. I've been here many times and talked about giving people smaller bins, and I've just answered Councillor Bithell with a similar question when he asked about rolling out new recycling containers, and it's £1 million. So that is an option, and you might consider that might be the best thing for us to do, is to give everybody a smaller bin. Accept that, not a problem. That is just an example of one of the other options. There are many more. A lot of councils are going to 4, not even bothering with 3 weekly collections, moving to 4. The reason the 3 weekly collections is modelled is to give you an example about what you can achieve by looking about some similar work that's been done both in England and in Wales. And the report talks about evidence we've received from Conway and Wigan, which have allowed us to assume that if you went 3 weekly bin collections, you would save around about 10% in waste tonnages. So that's the reason why that particular option has been modelled, and it would be remiss of me not to include that in the report, seeing as we have consulted in the budget consultation on that particular option twice now in consecutive years. But the report really is to present to you, in accordance with what the committee asked for, some information about the Welsh Government which you are reviewing their waste strategy, and to suggest to you that this is a factual report which presents the picture about where we are with our recycling performance, where you are as a council. And you should consider that unless we do something different, and there's 2 options, but there are loads. You could do 4 weekly, you could go straight to 4 weekly, you could do something really, innovative, and I'm more than happy to work with members on their decision for that. It is just merely to reflect about where we are. And the 2 model scenarios, and there's quite a lot of work that's gone into that in terms of the finance, which is included in the evaluation page. Of course, you can see the budget line for the service. It's somewhat irrelevant because all I'm saying is these are costs over and above what we currently pay. But I'm sure that information can be provided, and I can arrange that at any time, or I know that Mark Owen will give you that information for the whole service. And I'm sure he will be able to tell you how much the grant has reduced year upon year and is still forecast to reduce further. And you can see that. So a lot of the information on finance there is included as useful information, because this is over and above the baseline costs which the service currently operate at. And that's why it's been presented in the way that it has. But we can sort that out. The last point in terms of fleet, if you look at the graph, the very beginning about fleet, you will see that it's a slightly larger slice of the cake in terms of our carbon emissions. And yes, our fleet are included in our carbon footprint, but they're not included in the waste service. Our fleet are a separate item in themselves, and we are doing quite a lot of work as a council and certainly as a department on that. You will see carbon charging, electric charging points appearing. There's 2 now in the Guildhall car park. We've got a number in Abbey Road, and I believe there's plans to put some more down the driveway in the car park this current year. So we are looking at how we can review our fleet strategy to make that more energy efficient. We have to attack our carbon work on all of those themes. And you can't double count. So you can't count the waste item as being fleet when fleet is an item stand by itself. So we have to consider that. But of course, as you're probably aware, the electric vehicle technology is quite advanced for smaller vehicles and vans, but there's some way to go for larger fleet. There is hydrogen as an option for larger fleet, and there's a number of bus companies that are looking at that. But again, it's how you actually can get the hydrogen as a supply to fuel your vehicles, and that depends on the geography of where you are situated in the country. But that's going a little bit into too much detail. So I think I've covered everything that you asked. Options, budget line and fleet, but I'm more than happy if I can add anything.
We'll come back, Alia.
Yeah, just a couple of points I want to pick up on. Councillor Bithel's response with, he's raised the issues with Welsh Government. I appreciate that, but I think there's an opportunity here, and we talk about collaboration, and, you know, we're trying to avoid merger of councils and everything. So if Flintshire are already doing it, why aren't we banging on their door and asking them how and why and collaborating with them? That could be a missed opportunity. I take on board what Darren said with regards to the options, but there's still around a cycle of bin collections, and I think we need to go wider and more innovative because everything's interlinked. But I still believe if we are pushing people to recycle more, and that's the outcome, then to recycle more, you're going to need bigger boxes. It's natural, isn't it? Because it's moving from black bin into a recycle box. So, you know, there's something there with providing the tools to be able to complete the objective. There's still an outstanding question over whether our fleet is leased. I would like to know about that. And there's still an outstanding question with regards to the ethical procurement and the assurance that we're not shipping or we're not dealing with any company that's shipping waste abroad. And where you were saying about the size of vehicles on electric vehicles, I don't know whether you're aware, but Glasgow have just brought in 2 electric buses. So the vehicles are getting bigger. The technology, you know, is expanding from small Egos or whatever. The Nissan Leaf, I think, were one of the main ones, weren't they, with electric vehicles, into large commercial vehicles. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Dana. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, just on the first point, Chair, about collaboration, I can assure Councillor Dana Davis that this council does collaborate with other councils. In fact, I know she asked a question at the last executive board about collaboration, and there is a report coming back, as Dana has requested, on all the aspects that we collaborate with other local authorities. I can also say that I am currently the chair of APSI for the Wales Energy and Renewable Group, which meets twice yearly in Llandrindod, and we do collaborate with all 22 authorities across Wales on all projects, including fleet, energy and renewable energy. So all details are on the APSI website, and I can furnish Councillor Dana Davis on some of the work that we do as a local authority across Wales, but Darren will answer the specific questions on fleet.
Yeah, just in short, we have a mixed model for how we procure fleet. The council's had that policy in existence certainly since I've moved into environment. There's a mixed model, and it depends on best value. I use that term in the broadest sense, not the specific sense. The best value when it comes to actually purchasing the vehicles at any particular moment in time. We do have, and there's a mixed model. We own some vehicles, we lease some vehicles, and we hire some vehicles. That's a fact. And we do it based upon what is the best option for the council at the time when we're procuring the vehicles. I'm not sure that and I'm sure you weren't, but I'm fundamentally aware of what's happening in Flintshire, and I think when Councillor Biffle answered the question in terms of the work that we're doing, and what you have to bear in mind is there's a massive network of operations that take place at an officer level. There's technical officer groups that meet across the UK, and sure we share all this information. For your, specifically about plastic roads, there's been talk about plastic roads for about the last 4 or 5 years. An initiative started in Scotland. To date, they're not proven as being cost effective. I hope that the work, which was supported by the Welsh Government, and my officers and officers from this council are aware of what's going on in Flintshire. And I think what Councillor Biffle was trying to suggest is that that is all shared information from our technical officers group. And like engineering services, we also have technical officers groups that talk about fleet and that talk about the advancements of technology that's taking place. Yes, we are aware that there is electric vehicles. Do they work in cold weather climates? And in this part of the world we suffer. We've got an electric vehicle that sits on, and we've got a number in the Environment Department. And I can assure you that the capacity and the range of those vehicles in the cold, wet mornings of the winter and the frosty mornings, the capacity of the mileage range drops by half. We need that technology to improve significantly before it can get to a bin wagon which carries 18 tonnes of waste. It's not there yet. Hydrogen seems to be more of an option for passenger transport vehicles, but I'm sure you're aware, because you're aware of some electric work that's going on. There's lots of this information that's happening out there, and I don't want members to think that we're not. You just give 2 very small examples, which I'm aware of, and our officers are working in those areas, but you shouldn't be under any misapprehension that we don't engage in all those areas, because we do. And we do it in a far wider scale than probably you would imagine, but that's regular pieces of work, and of course there's APSI, which is a call on resource for members and for officers to get more information. Ethical treatment of our waste services. I have to be careful here, because I'm sure you are aware there is a contractual situation with FCC for processing of our waste, but if you look, and it's publicly available information about the waste data flow in Wales, and you will see the origin and the home for all our waste, which exists, and that's published information, and you can get that, and I can provide that to Councillor Davies if you would like privately. But we generally do not transport any of our material to countries where perhaps it's not being used in the way that it was intended. But that information is all publicly available and has been for some time, and periodically we get loads of questions about that, but I'm more than happy to give you some information on that if it would help.
Thanks for that. Danny, you've had one. I've got a number of other speakers. Have one, but be quick. Be quick.
It's just a final comment that this debate is about policy. So what I've suggested is to feed into that policy process. And, it's just taking it forward. I'm aware that you're doing work, but you've asked the question for Scrutiny to come up with policy direction. So I'm trying to feed into that. Thank you.
Thanks for that. And just going on, to Flintshire, doing the work with this, I applaud them for doing it, and I just hope if they do make any mistakes, we can learn from them and save us a bit of money in the future. So I think that's a positive way forward. Councillor Jeff Lowe.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm not a regular member of this Scrutiny Committee, as you well know. Fortunately, the leader of the council made a very important announcement here this afternoon, so it never come to a vote about the 3-weekly recycling. I want to make it clear, like other members have done, that if it had have done, and I'd have been a member of this Scrutiny Committee, I would not have supported it for some of the reasons that have been raised by colleagues. Having said that, I'll move on, Chair. I would also like to make a couple of observations about the work of our crews. And I can only speak from the experience in my own ward, and I have to say, nobody is perfect, but they are very, very good. I have to say, they're a good crew, and they do a good job in the area. We do have problems with because it's raised here about missed collections, and there's usually a very good reason for that. If it's a whole street, it's because the vehicle can't get access up there. We can't have vehicles going up roads, and you know, for reasons why, damage to other vehicles. So I just want to say that. Looking at the report, 4.3 on page 18, it talks about recycling performance. And it says Wrexham is amongst the highest in Wales. And we should be proud of that. Our residents work to make that success. It's not just what's done by this council, it's the residents of Wrexham that help to achieve that. But then the report goes on to say, the last few points are difficult to achieve and changes need to be made to the service. Surely that's down to the management to fine-tune that. You know, the public, in my opinion, are doing all they possibly can. I know there may be the odd one in the odd ward who doesn't do things correctly, and some of that perhaps might be down to us in terms of sharing that education as has been raised by other members. So that's one question I would like, you know, to be acknowledged, that what are the management going to do about it? And then on 4.9, it talks about the number of fines that have been issued by the Welsh Government. Again, there is no information about how many fines have been issued, just fines have been issued. And it's suggesting that if we don't perform better, Wrexham may be caught in that trap. Well, you know, merely to say fines could be issued, we need more information than that. The public needs to be trusted, and that information needs to be shared with them. So I would like to see more information there. On page 21 and 410, it talks about changes by other authorities being made. And we know Conway and places like that in other parts of Wales, these changes have been made. But again, there is no in-depth information, and that's needed as well. You know, you can't go out there to the public and say, look, I want to do this and I want to do the other, but and then we end up with the problems we will end up with. We will end up with fly tipping. We will end up with fat families, large families in particular, who may start to suffer health issues because their bins are overflowing. And it seems when you read this report, Chair, that none of those considerations, as I say, about health issues, have not been taken into consideration. I think it's very important for us as an authority, if we're going to do this in the future, which I hope we don't, I would like to see it done better than it is here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Jeff. Darren, are you going to come in?
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. I think the first point is quite rightly a question that you've posed in terms of what I ultimately, I suppose, am doing as management of the service to try and improve, and what I've tried to give a flavour of. It's very difficult when you come to these broad policy areas to provide and answer all the reports in a concise way, all the questions in a concise way to get them reported effectively. But what I've tried to do is talk about some of the improvements I've made, and the department has made to with the service, and try to reflect that in just something which is measured and means something to many people, and that is about the amount of reduced the amount of by which our missed collections have reduced. And of course, if we're picking more bins up, then you would hope that we get and recycling boxes, that we start to improve that. And indeed, in the modelling work, I have shown that we will continue to strive, and I will continue to strive for that. And if you look on page 22, you can see that between now and 24-25, I'm suggesting that by continuing then that work and looking for efficiencies and improving that, you will see there that I'm suggesting we might, and it's, you know, it is a big ask, get another 1.5% point by continuing with that work, but we will still be short. And what this report is trying to reflect on is that we need a step change, and that continuing work with that efficiency drive and the work that we're currently doing is probably not going to be enough. But it is modelling work. This is me putting a wet finger in the air and trying to get a feel for where we might go. And it's extremely difficult to do that because I don't know about, you know, our waste horizons might change. There might be a massive change in terms of the composition of our waste. And so it's extremely difficult, but it's just to give you a flavour for where we could be with some of our waste performance. But it does depend on what happens. You know, there's a lot of things happen nationally, not least with responsible packaging. The Welsh Government and the UK Government have consulted on responsible packaging of goods. And if the supermarkets change their behaviour and suddenly stop putting recyclable materials in packaging, then that might obviously impact on our waste composition, and we'll be in a different position. So you should be aware of that. And also there's a deposit return scheme which the Welsh Government and the UK Government consulted on not 12 months ago. And if those sorts of schemes are implemented, they will impact significantly on waste composition again, and probably on our recyclable material or what's available to recycle. I know in Wales we have processes and facilities in place to deal with plastic bottles. And if those bottles are suddenly taken out of those markets, there might be a hole left in Wales. So you should be aware of that. So it is modelling. It is, you know, it is what it says on the tin. It's about modelling work to give you a flavour of where we would be. Fines. As with a lot of things with fines, it wasn't something that I wanted to present, but and indeed if you speak to Welsh Government and to authorities, then you will find that inevitably when the Welsh Government have to intervene on whatever the subject matter is, if they're intervening with authorities to either fine them for some sort of breakdown in service, then it's done in a way where they provide support to those services as well. But I am aware that there have been a number of authorities who have received some fines, and that has hit them in the pocket. But I also, as a caveat to that, I am aware that a lot of authorities are receiving some support and help from the Welsh Government to help them improve, to get where they should be. So it isn't quite as clear-cut as... but there is always this threat, and there has been for a number of years now, when the Welsh Government set the targets, they did suggest that there would be financial penalties. And so I've just tried to reflect that in this report. Again, extrapolating figures, they suggest that those fines could be as much as £200 per tonne. And we collect something in the order of 90,000 tonnes of waste a year. So if you do some maths, and I did some, or the officers did some maths to try and work out where we would be in terms of modelling our waste and what a percentage point would mean in terms of tonnes of waste, it's around about £500,000 of fines we potentially might be facing if we are short by 2.5%. 2.5% away from the 70% figure. So it just gives you an idea. Obviously, if we were to fail to such an extent, I would anticipate that we might get a fine, but we would probably get some support as well to help us get to where we needed to be. So it's not just black and white, as a lot of these things are. So it was just to try and give you a flavour. Other authorities, I tried to include it in the report. It's a constantly moving feast, this, but of the 22 authorities in Wales, around a quarter have already made the change with changing their collection frequency. Of the remaining, as it says in 410, of the remaining 18 authorities, 16 have either got or have shifted to smaller sized bins. I think and I think it's Caerphilly, but please don't quote that, and apologies to Caerphilly if they're watching on the website. I think there's just the two of us who still have the same size bin and are not making any change to our waste collection work. All the other authorities in Wales have done something. So again, this is just to give you a flavour for the sorts of things that have happened across Wales. Obviously, if we do some more work as a group has been suggested or whatever, then we can look in more detail at that. But it's just to give you a snapshot flavour, but it's constantly changing, and you only need to look at the press, because there's more often than not press on this. Whenever any authority proposes a change, there's usually some press that goes out there, but that's to give you a snapshot.
Can I just come back to
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. It's unlikely to do that. But yeah, I'd like to thank the officer for the response. And it was also pleasing to note that he referred to the packaging issue about the Welsh Government and central government need to do more about that. It's not just a question of pushing this all onto residents in various towns throughout the UK. It's about where we buy our stuff from and how it's packed for us. You know, there's a huge problem there. How we deal with it, I haven't got a clue, but there is obviously a problem there and it needs to be addressed. It would be difficult for any government, I think, lifestyle many people live.
Thanks for your input, Jeff. Thank you. Just so you know, Graham's got a hospital appointment 4:45. He just dropped me a note, so that's where he had to go. So, right, and I think we're coming to the end then, so we need Brian Cameron. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, for allowing me to speak. Thank the officers for the report. I wasn't intending to speak, but I thought, listening to the discussion that has gone this afternoon, I thought it was important that I did speak, particularly in one thing that Councillor Biffle said earlier on, and also in relation to the stacker bins that are out in some of the areas of the county borough. I'm right in saying that the stacker bins, they are very, very good. They are very, very good, but they aren't the answer. And they aren't the answer for one reason. You've got the top bin is for paper and cardboard. The second layer is where I believe is the problem, is for cans and plastic. Cans and plastic. If you've got a family of 2 or 3, maybe 4 people that are getting just milk, 4 pints of milk, put 2 or 3 of them into that middle container along with your cans, it's full. Never mind all the rest of the plastic that's going into the black bin. So that would need to be looked at, I think. In many respects, I see people that some weeks they might not have any bottles on the bottom rung. And yet, if they were to put some of the plastic into the bottom, it would be classed as contaminated. I also think that needs to be looked at. If you've got an empty box, surely it makes sense to be able to put your plastic into that empty box. I'm not saying mix it, I'm just saying if there is the opportunity to put it in, it should be looked at. I think that should be looked at. I need to come back to something what David said earlier on about the camera in the cab. Over Christmas in my area, I had one estate. On the 3rd of January, it was supposed to have been emptied. The bins were supposed to be emptied. They didn't come, so I put it down to the Christmas delivery, the Christmas time. On the Saturday, which I think was the 4th of January, the recyclable was picked up and the black bins went, or half of them were, the other half weren't. 2 weeks after I managed to get that done. 2 weeks later, the half of the estate that wasn't emptied, the problem was with the first fortnight, it went the other way round. Now, why is this such a big thing? Now, for me, if the guys in the cabs had their cameras, they should have been able to go back the next day if they had to go back, because it was either on the tracker or on their camera that they hadn't delivered. I'm just saying this because it doesn't always feature that the camera can pick up everything. I'm just saying, if you went to three weekly bin collections, these type of problems are not going to go away. And I wouldn't be able to support 3 weekly bin collections anyway. But I'm just saying that there are problems out there, and not at the fault of residents. The first one I put down to Christmas, but I couldn't put it down to the second, and it was just as if it flipped over on its head. That the part of the round that was done the first week, it was left out the first week was done the second time, and the other time was done the other time. I don't want to make a song and dance about it, but I'm just saying that's one of the problems that you can get. But looking at the stacks again, I think you could do something.
Thanks for that, Brian. Any comment on that?
Yeah, without going into some, into operational detail, and I won't do that, but what I will say, and I hope that it wasn't my intention, but if there is anybody here that thinks I'm saying that the service we provide is flawless, I'm not. I'm honest and I'm a realist, and I understand that this particular service area is fraught with problems. The logistics of providing this service are massive. 6.5 million collections, I think we do. Individual visits to properties every year. We have 18 recycling rounds. We have 13 black or green bin rounds. We have another 7 vehicles then that do special type work. That's trade collections or food only collections. We do all those things. They are shipped out on a daily basis. I'm not looking for sympathy, but when you talk about the logistics of that operation, it's massive, and there is always going to be human error that comes into it, and we do have mechanical breakdowns. This Christmas was not a lot different than a lot of Christmases, and sometimes we get by the skin of our teeth in a lot of ways. We did have a mechanical breakdown this Christmas, which didn't help. But generally speaking, we did try and supplement a lot of the areas with caged vehicles to try and catch things up, and we try and do that. But I don't want to give anybody the impression that the service is flawless, and it's all about this is about future policy direction, which is what I'm trying to work with the committee on. So I'm conceding to the comments that you make, Councillor Cameron, and I accept, and there's always will be work to do in this area. It's a tricky one. Recycle boxes and recyclable trolley boxes. I think when we and this just shows you what happens when we considered buying the recycling boxes. We did look and decide, right, what size containers do we need? What's the biggest and what have you? And it's funny how glass, the quantity of glass that we've had has changed in a relatively recent time. And you probably reflect yourself. We don't have. You used to buy drinks and all sorts in glass bottles, and then they went to plastic. And now there's a current trend seems to be that glass is coming back again. I think we probably did get it wrong with the size of the containers. But what we encourage, and I encourage the staff to, I don't have a trolley box at home. I'm not one of those fortunate few. I have 2 recycling containers, and they're not a black and a green one, which were the ones which he's provided. I lost the black one, or the bin wagonette or whatever, I don't know. But I do separate my waste. There's 5 adults in my house, and I suppose I would say this, wouldn't I? But we could manage quite comfortably on probably monthly collection with our black waste. But I do put out 3 or 4 recycling containers every week. But we're trying to encourage the crews to take a look, to be human enough to take a look what's in the box. You can see if it's plastic and cans and deal with that, no matter what colour, what shape, whatever. And they are getting better. There's still some work to do with that. We encourage crews to take folded cardboard over Christmas. Folded cardboard in my bin, and you would have thought, they know where I live, I'm sure, you would have thought they take it. They left it. Absolutely none. So, what I do, I took it to the lodge and put it in the skip myself. But I just trying to illustrate with the system, the service still has its own failings, and we're working on that, but it's a constant piece of work. I tried to reflect in the report that we're doing, some of the progress we've made. There's still some way to go, I agree. Recycling containers, I think that's the trouble with those trolley boxes. We labelled the paper box, and if you go do any shopping at Amazon, you can get a pen and it comes in a box the size of a milk crate. So it's changed such a lot, and it's difficult. It's much better if you've got generic containers and you just put whatever and they'll have a look in. So there's work to do, I agree.
Just quickly, Brian.
Yeah, I wasn't being critical of what you brought in. I was just asking the question in relation to if that bottom box is empty, can people be allowed to put it in? Incidentally, I'm going to say one positive thing. 3 times over Christmas, I went down to the recycling. And I know it was in the press about the way people, the way they've been treated. I have to say, them guys down there, they were tremendous. They They helped, as I say, 3 times, and they were very, very helpful. So give credit where it's due.
I was in Plasmatic the same, I've got to echo that, they were brilliant.
I just want to make a final comment unless there's any other questions.
Well, there's no questions. I've got just one member wants to speak, but if you want to come in now.
Yeah, I was just going to say really, just to thank members for allowing us to come today. Just a comment from me really as lead member, just to thank the residents for making where we've got so far, because we've gone from 3% to about 66%, which I think we need to thank the residents on behalf of Wrexham Council that we've got so far. Yes, the service is not perfect, and I'd also like to thank the crews, because I do see social media and some of the abuse that the crews get on social media, which is sometimes probably unacceptable, because the majority of our crews do work really, really hard to deliver a first-class service. I mean, and finally, obviously we used to have quite a lot of agency staff, and I think in the report it does say that, you know, we've reduced our agency budget significantly, and we've started employing full-time employees. So we've added that little bit of continuity to the service, which is helping in providing a better service. And obviously that is good news, because it's obviously employing local people, and it's also reducing our agency spend, and it's providing, well, you've seen there, the mist bins is significantly down on last year. There's still lots more work to do, and it's over to the committee for your comments and observations.
Okay, thanks, Barry, for your input this afternoon. Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to move a recommendation that we placed here. It's clear that it's excited a lot of passion and personal opinion. Everyone's got an opinion about the service of the bin quality. I think we've demonstrated in the past that we can innovate, we can move on. It's a shame in a way that we've been reduced to discussing 3 weekly bin collections. It's a lot more than that, and I'm glad that we're focusing on policy and strategy and moving forward, because I think we do need to be radical. I'd echo the comments about needing to continue to innovate. Darren mentioned the idea of the circular economy. The Welsh Government is pushing that. The idea of reducing waste, reusing waste and recycling. We've got to focus on that rather than the narrow, you know, what size bins, how many times we collect it. We've got to look at the bigger picture. And that's why I'm going to propose that we have a task and finish group to be established to consider the means by which the Welsh Government recycling targets can be met. And I think we'll bring the terms of reference to the February meeting, if that's okay with everybody. Do you want me to read it out again?
Yeah, you can.
That a task and finish group be established to consider means by which the Welsh Government recycling targets can be met.
Can I second the principle of what you're saying? I was just going to put one other addition. I think we need to thank officers for the report. It's been very thought-provoking. But I think we need to put on record that we note the report. There are no decisions that are being made. And I'm very happy to support this. What we do need now is this, and I accept your wording there, we need this working group to develop strategy to increase recycling and to reduce our costs. But I think the wording you use now does the same thing, doesn't it? So I'm happy to propose it, to second that.
Okay, so I've had a proposer and I've had a seconder. Are there any other proposals? Any amendments, anything? No? So can I have a show of hands that we go with that? That's unanimous. And I'd like to thank members for I know that the report looked rather short this afternoon. I didn't think we were going to get this much discussion, but I think we give it a very, very thorough hearing. I'd like to thank you for that. And again, thanks very much for all your inputs and your hard work on this. Thank you. Just to remind members, it was said some time back that we have a debrief. Do you think we need one this afternoon? Or yeah, we do. Okay. So I'll ask everybody else to leave if you could. We just have a debrief just for a few minutes. Okay. Take your time, Rob, you're on it.
Cheers.
Thanks.